It's the ERP Confab. I'm David Essex, industry editor at Informa Tech Target's SAP website, with my colleague, senior news writer Jim O'Donnell. 2025 could be a pivotal year for SAP. Last year, the ERP market leader underwent a major personnel shakeup as 3 C-level executives left the company and legendary co-founder Hasso Plattner retired. 10,000 employees were moved into strategic initiatives like AI or bought out. So in the new year, SAP customers and industry analysts are watching to see if SAP can stabilize its management structure and reestablish trust with employees. Looming over all of this is the December 2027 deadline when SAP will stop supporting its legacy on-premises ECC and R3 systems, effectively requiring most customers to upgrade to its newest ERP platform, S/4HANA. Gartner research suggests most of them still haven't made the move. With the deadline bearing down, will SAP see more S/4HANA migrations in 2025? And how helpful are the Rise with SAP and Grow with SAP programs in guiding customers on the path to S/4HANA Cloud? We'll discuss these and other issues in the podcast. Jim, you've done a lot of coverage of SAP. You normally cover them as part of your regular beat in the ERP world, but probably the biggest vendor you cover. And you've done a lot of coverage lately of some of the issues that they're facing going forward into 2025. But you also did a lot of articles about the very eventful 2024 that SAP had, including a fair amount of management upheaval, more than we're used to seeing, and also some organizational restructuring that involved some redirecting of people, but also some layoffs. Can you give the listeners a little bit of a sort of a rundown of some of the highlights of what happened and are sort of leading us into 2025?
2024 was sort of I guess you would call it a turbulent year for SAP sort of internally. I think the issues of the leadership and sort of the restructuring they're a little interrelated, but they're also kind of separate in some ways. Just to sort of set the scene, it was about a year ago when SAP, in their first quarterly sort of financial earnings call, where they sum up what happened in the fiscal year previous, they announced that they would go through a series of restructuring where there would be they didn't exactly call them layoffs, but they would be employee reassignments that could affect up to, I think the initial number was 8,000 employees. And then subsequently during the year, they said it could affect up to maybe 10,000 employees. And the reason for doing this, at least the original statement from SAP, was they were trying to kind of redeploy their employees for sort of skills. So it was kind of like making it more of a push for sort of AI and developing, innovations along those lines. I think the way that people saw it was they were kind of moving people that were a little bit, maybe not in AI-focused technical areas would be moved out, and some people might find places in other parts of their organization that were focused on sort of these new innovation areas. But I think, in general, like a lot of these layoffs, I think it was for other tech vendors, I think it was maybe just a way that they could kind of get employees that were sort of less in the old way of doing things. I mean, they might have been in the organization for a number of years, and and it was kind of time to move on for some of them. So the restructuring of, a lot of tech companies have gone through this, and sort of their move towards more AI future and having development sort of oriented in that way. So I don't think it was particularly unusual for SAP to kind of go through this. And I don't think it's always necessarily a bad thing to restructure with the thought of maybe getting some hidebound sort of thinking kind of replaced by more forward thinking. And for SAP, a company that their big dilemma right now is how they're going to move their very large sort of installed customer base to the cloud and to innovation. So to a certain extent, it makes a lot of sense. But in reality, though, it's disruptive, right? I mean, it's disruptive for the employees. They don't know whether, where they stand in a lot of cases. For customers, they might not know like who's actually dealing with their accounts. So even though, the intention is not always like sort of negative or even wrong, It's a disruptive force. I think, in talking to the analysts I talk to and insiders, some of the customer groups, I think everyone's looking for more stability in that, just sort of that restructuring, that'll settle down, that there won't be sort of more, layoffs of a larger slice of the employees will be moving on or moving to different things. But it's going to be interesting because we're almost that was about a year ago. So in a week from now, they will be having a similar call with discussing their financial results for 2024 fiscal year. I would expect that we'll probably hear news one way or the other on that, whether they're on a growth pattern for the restructuring, or perhaps there'll be even more cutting to come of jobs and roles. I wouldn't be surprised either way. I certainly wouldn't be surprised if they said they were going to continue with sort of the restructuring and continuing to, as I said, they're not going to say layoff, but
Right.
essentially eliminating jobs or having people move on. I did know people within the company that they were a little older and they'd been there for a number of years, and they kind of had the sort of the typical way things are handled, that they were offered a package to kind of move along, or and the next package wouldn't be as good as the next. So it was sort of a way for people to see what might be next in their journey in the tech industry.
One other thing that I think happened in 2024, maybe it was end of 23, but I'm remembering maybe January, February 2024, was Christian Klein's CEO's controversial statement about innovation from henceforth only happening on the cloud platforms.
Right.
And I think he meant primarily S/4HANA Cloud Public Edition. Maybe it also includes private edition.
No, yeah, actually, no. I think specifically, and I think it was actually 2023, in the summer of 2023, they had announced that Christian Klein said that the innovation, AI, and even things like their sustainability products would only be available through the Rise with SAP program, which is their way out the sort of it's not quite SaaS, but it's their cloud offering, where SAP kind of runs the operation. But Rise with SAP is private cloud, and a year or so ago they came out with Grow with SAP, which is their public cloud. So I think the innovations were only going to be available to customers that were on those programs. That's where customers are really looking for clarity on that. They're looking for, I think they want like real business case, sort of proven cases where they're actually, SAP is really showing where these innovations are going to have business value for customers. So I think they're really looking for, and I don't think they necessarily are buying the fact that they need to go to Rise with SAP to get this stuff. It's been pointed out to me many times that there are lots of ways that you can implement these innovations, the AI, without going through Rise with SAP.
Yeah, like using the extension tools, maybe?
Extension tools on SAP Business Technology Platform, which is their development environment. And in some cases, maybe go through a third-party provider to, like a Rimini Street or a Spinnaker, that offers sort of third-party support for your on-premises or your, say, S/4HANA private cloud environment. Third-party providers can take like sort of the the running of that infrastructure and the support for that, and then you can do your innovations on whatever tech you want. You want to go through a cloud provider, and actually, there was a partnership between Rimini Street, a third-party or support provider, and ServiceNow to kind of have that middle sort of layer, the infrastructure layer, taken care of by them, and then you're free to kind of do whatever you want with your with your innovation on the on that side of it. So It is, I think, customers are really looking for SAP to provide some answers and clarity on where they're going to go with that. And I don't think SAP has really provided it. I think there's been, some unrest with where, Rise is going.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the upset was especially with customers, from what I've read, who had already made the move to on-premises S/4HANA. So they made the commitment, and now they're being told that they're not going to at least have the SAP delivered innovations for that product.
Just on that point alone, customers were sort of promised maybe a few years ago that, if you move to S4 HANA, then, that's a big move, right? And so they did that, and they were, and then, they kind of feel like, as you said, they might have the rug pulled out from their feet a little bit, or the goalpost move that says, well, now they've got to go through another fairly significant, transformation or change over to S4 HANA Cloud. These are huge, sort of complex environments. I think that's the single sort of biggest sticking point for any of those organizations about a move to cloud. It's not that they don't know that cloud is probably the best environment right now, but they have years and years of these customized environments with with their own processes, and it's a huge undertaking.
Rimini Street and the other third-party service provider option that you mentioned, that seems like a big selling point for them. I talked to somebody at Rimini Street, I think it was last year, and they were starting to offer that kind of extensibility option as a way of helping people to delay their move to S/4HANA Cloud. It's a line of business for them, and it seems like it's a place, it's at least going to prevent or slow down some people's move. And maybe SAP, in a sense, loses that business. And regarding that, in one of your articles, you quoted Holger Mueller from Constellation Research saying that SAP needs to make its AI available to on-premises users. I wasn't sure if he meant just S/4HANA on-premises or if he also means ECC, because the Rimini Streets and Spinnakers of the world are also trying to add this extensibility for the ECC users. They're the ones who really haven't made the move yet and are probably under the most pressure to make the big move. So I'm curious if you had any thoughts about that when Holger Mueller mentioned that. Do you think that's a direction that SAP is considering, or at least should consider?
Probably should, yes. Probably have, yes, probably.
Right.
Will it be like an official sort of press release, gather the hordes to? Probably not.
Right.
I think it might happen very quietly certainly for their largest customers. They have a lot of power in that. They have a lot of power in the direction, right? So if they feel, I think, that they can satisfy some of their big clients with providing a lot of this stuff sort of without having to go through Rise with SAP, they probably will. I do think, though, that the deadline for ending support, I've heard speculation that they might quietly move it, they might extend things. I think that they're going to stand pretty firm on that. I think my indication is that, Christian Klein has said it many times that they're not going to move off that. So at least their official stance is they are going to, and just to sort of reiterate, they're going to end support for legacy systems like SAP ECC, which is this venerable ERP that has been installed in thousands of customers by 2027. But there's also an extension to 2031, I think, for certain cases or whatever. But I think they're sticking to that, and it's coming up in a couple of years, right? It's only 2 years from now.
Yeah.
So.
I was thinking of that earlier, and whether they would extend it, because they already did one extension several years ago. I think now they announced it was going to be 2025. In terms of numbers on the calendar, it's 2 years. It's still almost 3 years because they're talking about December 31st, 2027. But still, that's not a lot of time, especially in the world of SAP on-premises systems.
Yeah.
Any kind of, especially the big implementation of like the private edition, which is like the same as the on-premises code or the on-premises, big projects still to do, and so that deadline is getting pretty tight. They're at risk of being the boy who cried wolf, because they already extended it once significantly.
Yeah.
So how many times can you say that without people thinking you don't really mean it?
Right.
But the other thing is, I think it could indicate if they ever were to extend it, it could really hurt them in the market, in like on Wall Street, because it suggests a certain desperation. I think it could send a bad signal, like, okay, in case you thought S/4HANA migration was going well, now we've had to extend the deadline again. And we're having trouble getting people to do this thing that we've told you in the investor community is really important, getting as many people as possible on the cloud, which is a better moneymaker for us and a better long-term plan. So I think, I have a feeling they're not going to extend.
I think you hit the nail right on the head. I think their messaging to their investor community is maybe a little bit different from what they might be saying to some of their customers. I think that it's absolutely in their best interest for the investment community to run up the cloud numbers as much as possible. Right? Even getting the bookings down, whether the customers have moved or not, they want to get those numbers on the books, because that's what they need to kind of show those numbers to Wall Street to, as you said, for the investors to see that you are getting that recurring revenue going forward.
Speaking of those adoption numbers, I had the opportunity to look into this in more depth because I updated the main page of our S/4HANA migration pillar package, our big editorial package that came out, I think, almost 3 years ago originally. We just updated it a few days ago. And there are some Gartner numbers. I don't have the methodology right in front of me, but Gartner generally doesn't say this kind of stuff without a pretty good methodology. And these were numbers as of, and maybe you've seen these too, by the end of second quarter of last year, so really not all that long ago, approximately 37% of worldwide ECC customers had bought or subscribed to licenses to start their transition to S/4HANA. And they said they think the total number of ECC customers worldwide is around 35,000. That's companies that own ECC.
Yeah.
And then Gartner said that approximately 60% of the customers added in that quarter are net new customers. So that brings me to this whole question of how the different offerings are shaking out. You mentioned you did a great short summary of the difference between Rise with SAP and Grow with SAP. The private edition version, which, it's the one that's less drastic change, especially if they've already gone to S/4HANA on-premises, but it's the more capable version of S/4HANA. The public edition is the one that is like every SaaS ERP product out there, really, multi-tenant SaaS, is more generic. It does have some extensibility, but it's not as customizable. It's harder to bring forward all the things that you might have loved about your highly tweaked SAP ECC and Business Suite system, and R3 actually. There's still some people R3. They talk about net new customers, and Grow with SAP is meant, I've read, I think in SAP's own language and some of the Gartner reports, that it is really for greenfield implementations. Now, greenfield doesn't always mean first-time ERP buyer. It can mean somebody who's already got SAP ERP, but it's a more drastic move, and you're setting up a whole new system. You can do some data migration, but it's not as much of a halfway measure like as a hybrid move is. So anyway, I guess I'm just throwing out observations there. I don't know if you have any reaction to that, because it seems like that wasn't so clear to us 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right, and I think that's another issue where I think they need to get out in front and get more clarity on these, and which version is available for what, and sort of what purpose they are, and kind of the innovation part of it. I think it's a big thing. I think that the Gartner report said that Rise with SAP sales have been dropping. I think one take I had on that was maybe because Grow with SAP is available now, so maybe Grow with SAP was getting some of the people that might have gone for Rise with SAP. So there was a little bit of you have to read a little bit more into those numbers, but and I think Grow with SAP can be, and I've seen it sort of being pitched as you said, it's more for greenfields. So sort of there's a whole market of smaller enterprise companies, sort of up into the the mid-level that it might be appealing to because it's a SaaS version and it's kind of the way that, I think that, works best for those companies rather than like a large enterprise that's going to move to a public cloud, which is a whole different story. There's a case to be made for Grow with SAP as the public cloud version to maybe be implemented in those larger enterprises as sort of a sidecar, side ERP where they can do some of the innovations. They can start experimenting with the AI and Joule and sort of see where they're going and maybe do, because you can get like the sustainability tools like sustainability footprint management or the sustainability control tower. You might be running that in your Grow with SAP public cloud edition that you have running alongside of your sort of the core system would be still running your old S/4HANA cloud, maybe private cloud, or the system that you might be lifting and shifting up to the cloud.
Yeah, I was really intrigued to read in one of your articles. I think it was an analyst who mentioned that sidecar idea. I hadn't even heard of that or thought of it. I guess people are desperate to try it, and if they're maybe a big enough company, they can do that. And yet, my cynical side's coming out again. I thought we were trying to do ERP consolidation. Often there's a move. Yeah. So I don't want to have a sidecar for too long. One thing I wanted to run by you in one of your articles again, great quote by Josh Greenbaum, the consultant and analyst who was owned from Enterprise Applications Consulting.
Yep.
And he said, linking AI and innovation to rise with SAP is one of the strategic blunders of the year. It drove a lot of customers into the arms of competitors or other ecosystem partners. It confused everybody, and the irony was that it wasn't even true. Now, I don't know about the wasn't even true part. I'm not sure what he meant there, but I really thought that was a fascinating and kind of astute observation, and it goes along the lines of what you were just saying earlier about how they're handling rise versus grow and just making people go for rise in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think the the part about it wasn't even true, meaning that you don't have to get innovation from Rise with SAP. You can. I think we mentioned this already in the conversation that companies can go through business technology platform. They can use other ways to have AI. So I think the point that Joshua was making was it doesn't have to be that way, that they didn't have to come out with this like blanket statement and kind of this is the way it's going to be, that you can only get innovation through Rise, because it just maybe drove to some competitors but just created this bad feelings all around. And I think one of the biggest sort of indicators of that was the German-speaking SAP users group, DSAG. When they first came out with that, it was not really responded to positively at all by the members of the German SAP users group. And they basically felt that some of the surveys of their members showed that there was feelings of betrayal, really, that SAP had sort of gone back on promises that they made, that you didn't have to go to the cloud for innovation. So I think that that indicates that there was some real customer unrest there. I think that was like in 2023 they had the real sort of headline of the DSAG members were not happy. They kind of walked that back last year a little bit. Their convention, I think in the fall, they issued some statements from DSAG, from their members, kind of saying that they do recognize that maybe cloud is the way to go now, but they still want to have SAP kind of work with them and kind of modify that stance a little bit, but they want to make sure that they are getting, as I said, sort of the clarity and the business case, demonstrating the value of moving to the cloud and getting these innovations.
That comment that I mentioned from Gartner, now they weren't narrowing this to S/4HANA Cloud Public Edition. When they talked about net new customers, approximately 60% of the customers just added in that quarter, they gave the total number cumulative. They didn't say, I don't see the numbers right here for how many new signups there were. But the idea that Grow with SAP is for the public edition, that's the multi-tenant SaaS version, and all this talk about net new customers, it has often occurred to me that product, that's their product so we, SAP, don't lose business to all those other multi-tenant SaaS ERP people, including Workday, I would say.
Yeah, sure.
But that's sweet. And they do have business by design still, and I think
Yep.
they are kind of keeping it going pretty well, and so that's not nothing, especially for smaller to mid-sized companies. But if it's net new business, it just seems like SAP is selling S/4HANA Cloud Public Edition to a lot of companies who haven't been SAP customers before.
Yeah.
So it's not a migration story in that sense.
No, it's not. I think we might have had discussions when we were at Sapphire, maybe the last one, but I think they did touch on that there's a pretty big market of companies that probably, wouldn't have thought themselves as being potential SAP customers because they're not, a really large enterprise. And now sort of growth SAP does give at least that, that option available to smaller to mid-size or sort of growing enterprises that are, that maybe, have sort of ambitions to be like a huge, large enterprise, but they're not there yet. Right. And they're certainly not in they've gone past having QuickBooks or something running their company. We're not talking 100-person companies in general, but the ones that are sort of getting up there and their business is more complex and they need more flexibility. They need some of the stuff that can offer that. But it's definitely a market I think that SAP certainly is used to. You mentioned business by design. I mean, they've sort of had products in there, but I don't think they're the first thing that you think of when you talk about sort of ERPs that are sort of designed for the mid-market, and growth SAP can potentially take some of that market.
In our discussion about what we wanted to talk about today, you mentioned also there's a need for SAP to come up with persuasive use cases. So I'm wondering in general what you think about that, but I also saw you did some good reporting on a retail version of S/4HANA Cloud Public Edition. So I know that's not the same as use cases necessarily, but that says something to have something that's targeting a very large vertical with a version of the public edition.
Yeah, no, I think that's part of it too. So, I think what their stance or strategy is to have, industry verticality processes included in the public version for retailers, for manufacturing, for distribution, for oil and gas, mining, so they'll have these versions of S/4HANA public cloud, but they'll already come with industry processes sort of loaded into them. Which is an industry trend. I mean, they're not the only ones that are doing that, right? So, I think any of these companies that are coming out, are putting in, especially the cloud vendors, cloud ERP vendors, are putting in sort of industry-specific functionality. I think, the whole idea is to make it easier to implement and easier to get more, return on your investment more quickly. I think that's the sort of argument in their favor. Whether or not it moves the needle with companies, that remains to be seen, but that's kind of where they're going with it.
I guess to sum up here, where do you think this leaves SAP in terms of the kind of year 2025 they're going to have? What are the main challenges and issues that they're going to have to try to deal with in the next 12 months?
Well, I think we sort of went over most of them, but I will be looking for the stability and leadership, and we didn't even really get into that as much, but they did have some leadership turnover, so it'll be interesting to see how some of their strategy might evolve with newer people in place under Christian Klein will, I expect, to continue to lead the company. It is an interesting year. I think we can say this almost every year. It's kind of a year of sort of confluence or crossroads kind of thing, but I think it is getting to a point with SAP that's really coming true because the deadline is only a couple of years away. They have this, this stance on innovation and AI and all these other sort of advancements that are going kind of beyond their core ERP functionality. They have to combine that. They have to sort of get the messaging right on that. They have to provide, we use this word a lot, but I think it's absolutely needed. They have to provide clarity. And they have to provide the justification for customers that are reaching the point where they have to make the decision on whether they're going to go, they need to start getting their ducks in a row for the migration. I mean, they probably should have started several years ago, and some of them already did. But now it's getting to a point where, yes, you have to kind of get these things. So there needs to be clarity on that. And one of the other, I think we might have mentioned, I'm not sure, and another analyst that we talked to, John Reed from Diginomica, who has said that they're a really interesting company to cover because they are so, sort of rooted in the past, but they have to get over this thinking or just being seen as a back office, just operational back office company, and one that's actually seen as having sort of technical relevance. And that's where certainly SAP wants to go and wants to be seen as. But are they going to walk the walk after they've talked the talk and be able to convince their customers that they are sort of innovative and they are sort of not just a back office operational vendor, basically. Mm-hmm. So I will be interested to just to follow that and see how the restructuring goes, see how what new products might be coming out. Will be really interesting this year.
I always hate to sound like a political junkie, as you know, and it seems like every year in the U.S. here we say, oh, this is the most important election in our lifetime. And I've heard it about 20 times in my life. And we can't quite say this is the most pivotal year for SAP, but there's a lot of tension here. And I like the way you summarized it in, I think it was the lead in one of your articles. You say that SAP continues to search for a balance between its push to a cloud-centered infrastructure and the needs of customers to struggle to make the migration, a push-pull that will only be exacerbated in 2025. Yep. And that's a good way of putting it. It's almost like a rubber band that's being stretched. It's got to come back to the center or it's going to snap, So there is pressure. There's pressure.
Absolutely.
Not just on customers, but on SAP also.
Yeah, I'm feeling that the customers are going to put the pressure on SAP to provide more of these answers. I think you're going to see more pressure from their competitors to kind of make the pitch that you don't have to stick with SAP. You can, at least for certain things, you can move on to another system. There's cloud providers that will be happy to take your SAP business, and there's, as you mentioned Workday. Workday, I think for certain, they're not going to threaten them as a manufacturing ERP system, but for taking away, a lot of their HR and their CRM stuff. They still got Salesforce out there. They've got Workday. They have, Oracle will sort of, provide alternatives to what they're selling. So it's really incumbent on SAP to make the case for not only for new customers to come on board with, say, a growth SAP for us, but also for their larger enterprises that probably should be sticking with us. So it's going to be interesting to see how that works.
It will be. So, Jim, I think we'll leave it there. You've summarized things really well, and it's always great to talk with you about SAP and other things.
Yeah, thanks, Dave.